What if the person who sleeps next to you every night was planning something unbelievable? Now imagine being at a sophisticated dinner, distracted, when a stranger approaches and discreetly slips you a note. The message is short, but devastating. Your wife is going to try to kill you. Don't get in the car tonight. What would you do? Ignore it and go about your routine as if nothing had happened? Or would you run for your life? That's exactly the decision Walter had to make. He had everything: money, power, influence, but he also had enemies much closer than he imagined. What seemed like a marital betrayal was actually a meticulous plan to erase his existence. His wife, his business partner, and perhaps even other people were involved. His death was already scheduled. Now, the only way out was to turn the tables before it was too late. The restaurant was a sanctuary of luxury and sophistication. Polished marble reflected the yellowish light of the chandeliers, and the refined aroma of haute cuisine mingled with the subtle sound of glasses clinking. Walter twirled the wineglass between his fingers absent-mindedly as he mentally reviewed the figures from his latest million-dollar deal. The waitress approached silently. Esther was young, slender, with eyes too alert for someone who simply waited tables. Without facing him directly, she set her plate down in front of him and in a subtle movement slid a small folded note next to his cutlery. Walter arched an eyebrow, surprised. He looked around to see if it was a mistake. Carla hadn't arrived yet. He picked up the note, unfolding it with a single movement. "Your wife is going to try to kill you. Don't get in the car tonight." The message was short, cold, and definitive. A warning or a threat? His heart leapt, but he kept his expression calm. He looked up, searching for the waitress. Esther had moved away, but not before casting him a quick, meaningful glance. Something in him told him that this was no joke. The restaurant door opened and Carla walked in, exuding elegance in her burgundy dress. She walked up to the table with a charming smile, as if nothing was wrong. "Surprise! I thought it would be a special evening." Walter smiled back, but his mind was racing. The note seemed to be burning in his pocket. "It will be. You know I love moments like this." She leaned over the table, touching his hand. "You seem distant. Is everything all right?" He watched her for a moment. The Carla he knew was calculating, charming, and engaging. But now he saw something else, lies hidden under a layer of well-rehearsed sweetness. "I'm all right, just a little tired." Carla relaxed, satisfied with the answer. Dinner went on with trivial conversations, but Walter heard nothing. His gaze occasionally wandered to the waitress. Esther didn't come any closer, but remained in the background, attentive. When Carla picked up her cell phone and sent a quick message, Walter felt a chill. His instincts screamed, "Get out of this situation." As they left the restaurant, the valet brought their car. Carla smiled, took the key and held it out to him. "Shall we go?" "It's late." Walter looked at the vehicle. The note in his pocket seemed to weigh a ton. "I need to sort something out at the office before we go. Can you take the lead? I'll meet you at home." Carla hesitated. For a split second, her eyes lost their usual sparkle. "Are you sure? I've been looking forward to this evening all day." Walter smiled. "Tomorrow will be even better, I promise." She forced a smile and got into the car. Walter stood there, watching her start the car and drive away. The silence of the night weighed on him. Marcus was nearby, leaning against a vehicle, talking to a man with a dark look on his face. Walter mentally recorded the scene before getting a cab and driving away. Seconds later, an explosion lit up the parking lot. The car that should have been his was now a ball of fire. Walter stood paralyzed, feeling the heat of the explosion hit his face. Esther's note trembled in his hands. My God, it was true. Walter felt the impact of the explosion vibrate in his chest. Orange flames rose up in the parking lot, consuming what should have been his car. The smell of burning gasoline and melted rubber permeated the air. People screamed all around, some running away, others coming closer, shocked by the fire. The taxi driver next to him turned around, startled. "Sir, wasn't that your car?" Walter took a second to answer. His mind was working too fast, connecting the dots. If he had entered the vehicle, it would now be in pieces, charred in the flames. He took a deep breath. Calm down. Think. No. But we're getting out of here. Now. The driver didn't hesitate and sped away from the scene. From the back seat, Walter watched the fire through the rearview mirror, feeling the adrenaline pulsing. He reached for his cell phone. Messages from Carla flashed up on the screen. "Where are you? There's been a horrible accident. Did you see it? For God's sake, answer me." Walter didn't answer. His heart was pounding, but his mind was already plotting the next steps. "She doesn't know I'm alive, and she shouldn't know so soon. Change the route. Don't take me home. I want a discreet hotel. I'll pay double." The taxi driver agreed, changing the route. Walter rested his head on the back of the seat and closed his eyes. He tried to ignore the uncomfortable feeling that he was being watched. He knew that the real war was just beginning. The hotel room was simple, but safe. He locked the door, turned off the lights, and sat in the armchair, watching the city from the window. On his cell phone, Carla's messages kept coming. "Walter, I'm desperate. The fireman said there was no one in the car. Where are you? Talk to me, please." He read everything without expressing any emotion. Esther's note was on the bedside table, next to an untouched glass of whiskey. His gaze wandered over the illuminated city. Someone had tried to kill him. Someone who slept next to him every night. The pain of betrayal wanted to surface, but he suppressed it. It wasn't time to feel. It was time to act. He picked up his cell phone and dialed a number. It took a while for the call to be answered. Then a female voice whispered on the other end, "I knew you'd call." Walter pressed the phone to his ear. "We need to talk." Esther hesitated. "If they know I've spoken to you, I'll be dead. If we don't talk, we both will be." Silence. "Where?" she finally asked. Walter gave her a discreet address. He didn't know if he could trust her, but he knew one thing. She was the only clue he had. He grabbed his coat and left, without looking back. Walter adjusted the collar of his coat as he walked down the narrow alley where he had agreed to meet Esther. The city around him followed its normal rhythm, but to him everything seemed like a blur. His mind was focused on just one thing, finding out how far this betrayal had gone. At the end of the alley, the dim light of a street lamp illuminated her silhouette. Esther was leaning against the wall, her arms crossed, her eyes alert like those of someone expecting the worst. Walter approached, but kept a safe distance. "How did you know?" He got straight to the point. Esther looked away for a moment. "I served the wrong table." Walter frowned. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, as if choosing her words carefully. "I was taking wine to another table when I heard your wife and Marcus talking. They were laughing. They were talking about how today would be the perfect end." Walter's jaw tensed. "Are you sure it was about me?" Esther laughed humorlessly. "They said your name, and they described the accident, the car exploding, everything." Walter looked around, making sure no one was following them. "Why did you warn me?" Esther hesitated. "Because it was the right thing to do." He analyzed her face. There was truth there, fear too. "Do they know you heard?" Esther nodded slowly. "Marcus realized I was nearby. He stopped talking on the spot, but Carla managed to divert the subject. From then on, I felt watched. I knew that if I didn't warn you, they could make me disappear afterwards." Walter ran a hand over his face. Everything was falling into place. But the worst part was realizing that this conspiracy didn't start yesterday. He looked at Esther once more. "You're in danger. So are you." Silence. Walter took a deep breath. He needed to pretend he was dead for a while longer, but he also needed to act quickly. They think they've done it. Let's leave it at that. Esther frowned. What are you planning? Walter gave a half smile. Turning the tables, he took out his cell phone and typed in a number he hadn't used in years. Where are you going? Esther asked. To start hunting. Walter disappeared into the darkness, leaving Esther alone in the alley, trying to figure out if that encounter would change her destiny forever. Walter drove through the city streets without a clear destination. The conversation with Esther echoed in his mind. Carla's betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was calculated, meticulous and cruel. And Marcus, her partner, her longtime friend, was at her side in this dirty plan. He stopped the car in a discreet area, took out his cell phone, and opened old bank records. As he analyzed recent transactions, something caught his eye. Large sums had been withdrawn from corporate accounts and transferred to unknown offshores. Bastards, he muttered. They didn't just want to kill him, they wanted to erase his existence and steal everything he had built. Walter needed proof. He needed to understand how far this conspiracy extended. He dialed a number he knew well. After 3 rings, a hoarse voice answered, Walter? Lucas, I need a favor. Aren't you supposed to be dead? Walter smiled. Apparently, not every plan works out as expected. I need access to Marcus's files, everything I can find on financial transactions over the last 6 months. Lucas laughed. What's that going to cost me? The same as always. Silence. Give me a few hours. I'll send you what I find. Walter hung up and took a deep breath. He needed to stay calm. His next step was to find Esther again. If Carla and Marcus were suspicious of her, she was also in their sights. Esther was sitting in a small cafe, looking out at the street with a worried expression. Walter sat down in front of her, uninvited. She widened her eyes. You're crazy to be here like this. And you for helping me. Esther looked around suspiciously. Does Carla know you're alive? No, and she can't know. She took a deep breath. Then why did you come to me? Walter took out of his pocket a folded sheet of bank records he had found. Because you know more than you realize. Esther took the sheet and looked at the numbers. What is this? The money that Carla and Marcus are stealing from me, she frowned. That's a lot of money, Walter nodded, and I want it all back. The two of them stared at each other. From that moment on, they were officially in this dangerous game together. Walter stared at the sheet with the financial records. Each number there represented a piece of the empire he had built up over the years, and which Carla and Marcus were trying to snatch away from him without a trace. Esther continued to analyze the papers, her eyes moving from side to side, absorbing the information. They've already withdrawn millions, she muttered. This didn't just start. This plan has been brewing for months. Walter ran a hand over his face. How blind had he been? How many times did he ignore the signs because he trusted too much? I should have known. They were careful, Esther said, but her voice didn't hide the tension. But why kill him now? If they'd been stealing for so long, why not continue until you lost everything? Walter frowned. She was right. Carla and Marcus could simply carry on embezzling money, and he wouldn't realize it until it was too late. But they wanted to eliminate him. What had changed? He picked up his cell phone and scrolled through Carla's old messages, looking for anything that might indicate a sudden change in behavior. Then he found something. 2 weeks ago. I knew it, he whispered, and Esther tilted her head. What? Walter turned his cell phone towards her. On the screen, a message from Carla. We need to talk about the merger. I know you want to wait, but Marcus and I think the time is now. Esther frowned. Merger? My company is negotiating a merger with an international group. The deal is worth billions. Esther's eyes widened. So that's it. Walter nodded. If I died before the contract was signed, Carla would inherit my shares and do the deal herself. They'd get everything. Silence. Walter felt a knot in his stomach. It wasn't just about theft. It was a masterstroke. "You have to stop them," Esther said with urgency in her voice. He stood up. I need to prove all this before they kill me for real." Esther hesitated before asking, "What if they find out you're alive before then?" Walter looked at her, his expression grim. "Then I'll have to outrun them." Walter parked a few blocks from Marcus's company building. It was late at night, and the office should have been empty, but he knew that men like Marcus always left traces, and he was there to find them. Esther adjusted the hood of her jacket next to her, visibly nervous. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Walter gave her a discreet smile. "If I only waited for good ideas, I'd be dead by now." They crossed the street and sneaked into the building. The reception area was empty, and Walter had already studied the security system before they entered. He used an access card that still worked. Marcus hadn't blocked his name from the systems. A mistake. They went up to Marcus's office floor and through the dark corridors to the partner's office. Walter tried the doorknob. It was locked. He took a master key from his pocket and inserted it into the lock. Within seconds, the door opened. Esther entered first, observing everything. "Where are we looking?" Walter went straight to Marcus's computer. He turned on the machine and inserted a USB stick with special software for extracting data. "We need anything that connects Marcus and Carla to the plan." While the software was doing its job, Esther opened a drawer and found a dossier with signed documents. "Walter, look at this." He took the file and opened it. His eyes scanned the pages, and then he froze. The document was an authorization to transfer his shares to Carla, but what made his blood run cold was the space reserved for his signature, already filled in. A forged signature. Walter felt his heart race. "They were already preparing to take everything before I even died." Esther looked at him alarmed. "This is proof. You can use it." Before Walter could reply, a noise in the corridor made them stop. Footsteps. Someone was coming. Walter blacked out the computer screen, pulled out the flash drive and closed the files. He and Esther hid behind a shelf. The office door opened slowly. A man walked in, tall, strong, carrying a gun in his waistband. He looked around carefully. "Strange. I swear I heard something." Walter held his breath. If they were discovered there, they would be dead. The man took a few more steps and picked up a phone. "The office is secure. No sign of a break-in." He waited a moment, then nodded. "Yes, sir." "Yes, Marcus." Walter closed his eyes. "Damn." The man left and locked the door on his way out. Esther let out a breath, shivering. That was close. Walter put the documents inside his jacket. It was. And now we know that Marcus is already suspicious. They had to get out of there, and fast. Walter and Esther left the building with hurried but calculated steps. The night air seemed heavier now that they knew Marcus was already suspicious. They couldn't take any more false steps. As soon as they got into the car, Walter pulled the dossier out of his jacket and opened it again, analyzing every detail of the forged signature. It was a perfect scam, but now he had the proof. Esther looked nervously out of the window. What are we going to do now?" Walter started the engine and accelerated. "Make Carla and Marcus think they're in control." She frowned. "How?" Walter smiled. "By creating a trap." He took out his cell phone and accessed one of his corporate accounts. In a few minutes, he made a considerable bank transfer, redirecting a large sum to an offshore account that Marcus used. A fake transfer. A decoy. Esther's eyes widened. "Did you just transfer money to Marcus? To make him think he still has everything under control? He'll think I'm a ghost, or that someone inside the company is going through the funds he stole. He'll run around trying to understand what's going on." Esther crossed her arms, beginning to understand. And when he goes after it, you'll catch him on the hop." Walter smiled. "Exactly." The answer didn't take long. Walter's phone vibrated. A message from Carla. "We need to talk. It's urgent." Walter twirled the phone between his fingers, analyzing the situation. "She took the bait." Esther looked at him with concern. "What are you going to do?" Walter took a deep breath. "Make her show me her next move." He replied to the message. "Wasn't our dinner enough?" The phone vibrated again. "Don't joke about it. Meet me at the penthouse. It's serious." Walter looked at Esther. "Carla is desperate. That means Marcus is too. Is that a good thing?" Walter stared at the city ahead. It's perfect. He knew he was about to walk over the edge, but he also knew that this was exactly what his enemies did when they thought they were in control. This time, it would be different. This time, he would control the game. Walter drove in silence towards the penthouse where Carla was waiting for him. The luxurious building shone against the night sky, a perfect reflection of the world he lived in, or had lived in until he realized it was all a sham. Esther, next to him, fiddled nervously with her fingers. "Are you sure this is a good idea? You're heading straight for the snake's den." Walter kept his eyes on the road. "That's exactly what I want." Esther let out a frustrated sigh. "What if it's a trap?" Walter smiled. "So who's hunting whom?" When they reached the entrance to the building, Walter turned off the car and turned to Esther. "Wait for me here. If I'm not out in half an hour, leave." She hesitated, but nodded. Walter got out of the car and entered the building. The elevator went up slowly, and with each floor, his mind went over every detail of the plan. As soon as the doors opened, he found Carla standing on the balcony, a glass of wine in her hand. She turned when she heard his footsteps, her eyes reflecting a mixture of shock and relief. "My God, Walter!" She ran up to him, wrapping him in a tight hug. I thought you had—" Walter gently pushed her away. "Died?" She blinked, trying to keep her expression of despair convincing. "What happened? Did you see the explosion? I went crazy trying to find you." Walter watched her, every word, every rehearsed gesture. "I think we need to talk." She nodded frantically. Yes, of course. Tell me what happened." Walter followed her into the apartment. The place was as spotless as ever, but something seemed wrong. He scanned the room. No Marcus, but something told him he wasn't far away. Carla poured another glass of wine and held it out to Walter. "You must be in shock." Walter took the glass, but didn't drink. "And you? You seem quite calm for a potential widow." Carla forced a smile. "Don't talk like that. I was desperate." He decided to poke deeper. "Desperate enough to break into my company and try to take it all over?" Her smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" Walter pulled the dossier out of his jacket and threw it on the table. Carla paled. "What is this?" "The documents you and Marcus prepared, with my forged signature." The silence between them was suffocating. Walter leaned forward. "I know everything, Carla. I know about the embezzlement. I know that my death was part of your plan." She opened her mouth, but there was nothing more to say, because now she was the one who was cornered. Carla remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the documents spread out on the table. The color drained from her face, but Walter knew that her mind was spinning, searching for a way out. She took a deep breath and tried a hesitant smile. "Walter, you've got it all wrong." He laughed humorlessly. "Wrong? Killing me wasn't enough? Did you have to forge my signature too?" Carla took a step back. "I didn't want it to be like this." Walter slammed his hand on the table, making the wine glass shake. "So how did you want it to be? That I should simply disappear without question? That my company and everything I'd built up would be dumped in Marcus's lap?" Carla closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, there was something different about them. "If you already know everything, then I don't have to pretend anymore, do I?" Walter crossed his arms. No, you don't. She sighed and sat down on the sofa, crossing her legs with a calm that seemed almost rehearsed. You've always been a brilliant man, Walter, but you've also always been blind. He frowned. Blind? Yes. Blind to the rot within your own company. Blind to the people who actually move the money and make the decisions. Do you think Marcus and I did this alone? Walter felt a shiver run down his spine. What are you saying? Carla smiled, and this time there was no pretense. I'm saying that there's a lot more to this game than you realize. If you had known the truth, you would have begged to die in your own car. Before Walter could react, the apartment door opened violently. Marcus entered, accompanied by two armed men. I told you he was too smart, Marcus muttered. Walter remained motionless, controlling his breathing. You took your time. Carla picked up her glass of wine and took a sip, relaxing on the sofa as if the situation was nothing more than a chance meeting. Walter, darling, you should have stayed dead. Marcus pulled out a gun and pointed it directly at him. Walter stared down the barrel of the gun and remained calm. Then kill me, but do it right this time. Carla laughed. Oh no, love, we have much better plans for you. And then everything went dark. Walter woke up with his head throbbing. The cold, rough floor beneath him indicated that he was in some kind of abandoned shed. He tried to move, but realized that his wrists were tied to a metal chair. The darkness around him was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Finally awake, Carla's voice echoed through the space. She approached slowly, her heels clicking on the concrete, while Marcus followed close behind, holding the same gun as before. Walter raised his head and stared at them. Do you really think you're going to get away with this? Carla smiled, leaning in front of him. Oh, Walter, you still don't get it, do you? He kept his gaze fixed on her, showing no fear. What haven't I understood? She sighed, crossing her arms. That we were never the real enemies. Do you think Marcus and I orchestrated all this alone? There are much more powerful people involved. People who control much more than you realize. Walter felt his stomach turn, but his expression remained unchanged. And what do you get out of it? Marcus stepped forward. Survival, Walter. In the end, that's all that matters. Walter let out a dry laugh. So you sold your souls to these invisible ghosts, and now you think you're going to stay alive? You're just pawns. As soon as you get what you want, you'll be discarded. Marcus gritted his teeth, but Carla kept smiling. That's fine. But first, you're going to sign some documents. She pulled out a tablet and turned it towards Walter. On the screen, a contract transferring all your shares. This time, we need your real signature. Walter shook his head slowly. What if I refuse? Carla leaned in, her eyes cold. I think you already know the answer. Walter took a deep breath. He needed to buy time. I'll sign. But I want to see both of you sign too. I need to make sure I'm giving it to the right people. Marcus exchanged a look with Carla. That wasn't part of the plan. Walter smiled. Nothing ever goes exactly to plan, does it? Marcus's hesitation was all he needed. The sound of screeching tires outside was the first sign. The second was the bang of doors being kicked in. Police, hands up! The shed was flooded with lights and armed men. Carla turned around in surprise as Marcus tried to pull his gun. But before she could react, 2 shots echoed in the air. The police security guards acted quickly. Walter watched everything happen in slow motion. Marcus fell to the ground, wounded. Carla, in shock, slowly raised her hands. And then, from the midst of the policemen, a familiar figure emerged. Esther. She walked over to Walter, took out a knife and cut his bonds. I told you you needed a plan B. Walter massaged his wrists and glanced at Carla. Game over. The police took Carla and Marcus away in handcuffs. Walter stood in the middle of the shed, watching as his revenge finally came to fruition. Esther stopped next to him. What now? Walter smiled, taking a cigarette from his pocket. Now I rebuild. He lit the cigarette and took the first drag, but this time without making the same mistakes. As the sun began to rise over the horizon, Walter felt for the first time in a long time that he was in control again, and he would never lose it again.